Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second lunchtime epic talk. So, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the format of these sessions, but basically, we started the public talks, known as epic talks, in the evenings about 2 years ago, and since then we've had a lot of requests from staff for talks within work hours, so that everyone's able to make them. So taking your comments and feedback on board, we've started to organise lunchtime epic talks. So today we have a very special speaker who will be speaking on visionary leadership. And our speaker is Clare Smale. Clare is Wiltshire born and bred and has lived in the Devizes area for nearly 30 years. Her first career was teaching geography and PE up until 2002. Since then, Clare has been running her own business, which is Inspired to Learn, for the last 17 years with her husband Barry, who himself worked for the council in the mid-90s as manager of Amesbury Sports Centre. So Clare works across the UK, Europe and beyond, running leadership development programmes and executive coaching. More recently, Clare has been helping our Wiltshire Council coaches gain their level 5 ILM certificates in coaching and mentoring. Outside of work, Clare loves mountain and road biking, and you might bump into her playing the ukulele in a local pub one evening or walking her collie along the Onstdyke. Clare also volunteers for Julian's House Hospice and the Clean Up Devices Squad. So in today's talk, Clare will explore 6 components of visionary leadership based on her research project and subsequent book, Transform Your Goals with Vision. So without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Clare Smale.
So thank you for having me, first and foremost. It's really nice to see you all. And I'm completely staggered that you're all giving up your potential lunch breaks to be here today. So this is what we've got, 45 minutes. So the biggest challenge is actually for me to manage my expectations because I can talk for England. So my job for 45 minutes is to give you as much as I possibly can that's practical, that will get you thinking, that will get you inspired to want to go away and maybe read a bit or find out a bit about some of the things that have come up in today's talk, so that it has, genuine. It's really important to me it has some genuine value for you. So we've got time for questions at the end. I think it's about 15 minutes at the end, which Wally's going to rove around with some mics and things maybe. So that would be a really good opportunity if there's anything that you want to read based on what I've said today. I've got a couple of books with me that I'd recommend, or if you want signposting to some of the tools and techniques that I'm going to talk about that you can use in your day-to-day work in the council with people that you maybe line manage, maybe lead, maybe projects that you're involved in at the moment. So over the 45 minutes, the visionary leadership we're going to talk about in 2 contexts really. First of all, there's the big, I've got a vision and it's amazing, and how do you translate that into some sort of working reality? So a bit like a vision statement or the council's mission statement, a vision around communities. So you've got this big, all-encompassing sort of blue sky, brilliant, inspiring idea. But actually everything that I'll talk about in the next 45 minutes, you can also relate to your day-to-day interactions with your colleagues, and potentially even in other areas of your life beyond your work. So that's the plan in 45 minutes. You impressed? No pressure. So this is the system. I'm going to present it straight away to you. This is what the book talks about. It came up by accident. I don't enjoy writing. I'm not a natural book writer. It was never on my bucket list of things to do. I spent a lot of my time doing management and leadership training, and I got asked one day, going back about 10 years, I was in the front of the room with a group of people on the CMI Level 5 course, who said, "Come on then, Clare, what is this visionary leadership stuff?" And I sort of went to a flip chart and sort of faffed my way through some sort of average answer and came out of that thinking, that was rubbish. I actually couldn't say anything that had any depth or substance in response to that question. And at the same time, I myself was doing a qualification where I needed to do a piece of research in order to gain the qualification. So I thought, ta-da! Visionary leadership. The book then came out of the fact, I did some interviews with a whole bunch of people. It started off with someone some of you might know, a guy called Patrick Hazelwood. He used to be head teacher at Marlborough, St John's School in Marlborough, who I bumped into one day, and he was telling me about his alternative curriculum and how he was going to throw the national curriculum out of the window and do what he wanted to do with his school because it was going to be just so impactful for the children. It was what learning was really about. And it was like, flipping heck, can I come and work for you? This sounds amazing. This is a visionary, inspiring leader. Can I interview you? Will you be my first interviewee for my project? So we did. We sat down for a couple of hours, and then I went off and found all sorts of other people from various walks of life who I considered to be visionary leaders. And I've discovered sort of by accident that they all did the same things. And they all did a lot of stuff that they didn't share in common that was very personal to them. But what they all did is what these 7 steps got translated into. And I suddenly thought, you know what, this is teachable. This is actually a recipe for explaining to people what the components of visionary leadership are, and how can I package that and dial the book. So in about half an hour, so we're not going into anything in any great detail, in about half an hour I'm going to explain to you what all of those steps are. The first 4 or 5 steps are about leadership. The top couple of steps are about management. So my first question to you is, what's the difference between leadership and management? And if we had 20 minutes on our hands, I'd say, go off, have a chat in pairs, make a bit of a list, let's get the flip chart out and see what your answers are. But in response to that, you'd probably come up with a bit of a list like this. So those of you that have been on CMI management development programmes, I know a lot of you will have done that through the council, and some of you are right in the middle of your management apprenticeships at the moment. This is a classic assignment question in virtually the first piece of written work that you do, explain the difference between management and leadership. First thing on the list, vision. Leadership more than management. Heart rather than head. So visionary leaders working more with heart rather than head. So being a human, first and foremost, with a heart and a soul and passions and aspirations, things that really matter to you, before anything cognitive takes place. So that's where we're actually going to start this talk, with your heart and your soul and what's in your guts and what really matters and makes a difference to your working life, not the head stuff. Because that comes towards the end, that's much more about management, and a lot of that you can delegate. Woohoo! That's the good news. So what's the difference? The difference between visionary leaders and leaders who are okay, nothing wrong with them, but they're not those people with real charisma that inspires you, where you just think, I just want to spend time with this person because they feed my energy, they feed my heart, they feed my soul, they give me something that means that the more time I spend in their company, the better I'm going to perform at work. So how do they do that? How can you teach that aspect of what's actually quite deep in somebody? Well, maybe you can't, but maybe what you can do is to help people to uncover it. This is where the whole world of coaching comes in, doesn't it? I'm asking some of these key questions around what do you want to have happen, first and foremost. What do you want to have happen? You're here for a reason today. You've given up your lunch hours, you're curious, you're interested, maybe there's some potential for this in your mind right now. So working for Wiltshire Council, what do you want to have happen? What's the conversation about what has to have happen or needs to have happen for Wiltshire in the next 10 years, for the vulnerable people, for the communities that you serve, for the economy? If we didn't have that conversation about what has to happen right here, right now, what would you regret for all of that in 10 years' time? And that last question in blue is probably the best coaching question on the planet. So for those of you that coach, when someone comes in to have a one-to-one or a coaching session, you sit down and say, tell me about what's going on at work. How's your project going? Da, 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 da. How are you today? How about if you started with, we've got an hour, what's the thing that we need to talk about in that hour that Wiltshire would want us to discuss, that we'd regret in 10 years' time if we didn't? So that idea of that systemic coaching. It's not about the individual in the room, it's not about you as individuals sat here today, it's about that ripple-out effect on everybody that you have contact with and all the people that you indirectly have contact with and that you're in service of and rarely see a lot of the time. So, the law of attraction. So Napoleon Hill in the 1920s, the book that you see on the screen, Think and Grow Rich, very American, you know, and the big, sort of shiny American public speakers, the Tony Robbins of this world, they're absolutely amazing, but definitely very American. Think and Grow Rich is not about money, which is a bit of a bandwagon that the Americans have taken it on. It's about this inner richness. If you gave an hour of your time to think about what you really want to have happen, what inner richness in you would that grow and develop and feed that would then enhance your performance, enable you to make the best decisions for the right reasons in service of everyone and everything that you serve. So it's not a great book to read, I wouldn't recommend it particularly. There's much better modern books that use these principles. But what's really interesting about Think and Grow Rich is that neuroscience is now proving that Napoleon Hill wasn't as mad as a box of rocks. So we've got this area of the brain, I'll talk about it again in a minute, called the reticular activating system, the RAS. It's at the top of the brain stem. And it's like a filter for what is it worth paying attention to. Because you're bombarded with about 132 billion bits of information every second of your waking hours. And your brain, that's overload, it can't cope, it needs to filter that out. And depending on whether you're in a state of alertness or relaxation or anxiety, your brain will filter out different information for different reasons. But the reticular activating system, you've all had the experience, I'm sure, where you decided you're going to buy a particular car, a particular pair of shoes, you're after the latest Wiltshire calendar for next year, whatever it might be, and all of a sudden, everywhere you go, it starts popping up in your world. You know, those cars have always been out there on the road, but for 3 or 4 days, you notice them everywhere you go, so you know what, I really do fancy one of this. And that's the reticular activating system. You've asked for what you want, and then the brain goes out, looks for it, and brings it into your world. So one of the books I brought with me, The Luck Factor, Richard Wiseman, he thought there's no such thing as luck. It's about noticing opportunity. It's about asking for what it is that you want, then noticing the opportunities that are presented to you and doing something with them. Opening the doors that present themselves and walking through. So what do you want to have happen? Thoughts in your mind right now? What do you want to have happen? Associate into that fully. You know, visionary leaders are able to answer that question day to day, year to year, decade to decade, and stand in it. Go out there into their future and actually stand in that moment and have that sensory embodied experience. You know, they can feel it, kinesthetic of VACOG, they can visualize it, the V, they can hear it, the A, they can smell it. They can smell success around the corner, which is the O, which stands for olfactory. And for some people, they can taste success, gustatory. And then the skill of those leaders is to come out and back to the present and say, do you know, I really want that, I want to be back there, that is worth going to, that is worth having. What am I now going to do with that information in order to find the right doors to open and then decide which ones I'm going to walk through? So you've got to know the reticular activating system, which I mentioned earlier. This idea of IQ being completely outdated. The brain has neuroplasticity. It has the ability to build new synaptic connections. It's an amazing thing. So the elite athletes, do you know some of the visualizations that elite athletes are taken through? So for example, if you've got somebody who's aiming to complete, say, an Ironman in 5.5 hours, they'll do a 5.5 hour visualization. And they will sit and they will visualise and hear and smell and taste and feel every second of that 5.5 hours in real time, which has a neuromuscular memory and has been proven in science that's starting to come out now from sports science of actually having muscular impact as well. So they've done some work with weightlifters where they've got weightlifters to visualise weightlifting and actually do the weightlifting. And it's something like, I'm going to completely misquote this now, but it's something like 80% of the visualisers have that same physical, muscular improvement as the ones that actually do it. That's like completely bonkers, isn't it? But just starting to tap in. So if you like this idea of neuroscience and how it can feed you as a leader, there's a really good book called Neuroscience for Leadership Coaches, which is just brilliant at putting it in words of plain English, basically, for the likes of me, and actually getting a handle on some of the terminology and how it works. So did you see the gorilla, the experiment by Richard Wiseman, where he may have seen it on YouTube, you may have heard of it before, it's getting a bit old, a bit long in the tooth now, but where he gets a group of students in to play basketball, he puts them into two teams, gets them bibs on, and says to them, right, red bibs, your job is to pass the ball as many times as you can in the next 2 minutes. Blue bibs, your job is to count how many passes are made in those 2 minutes. Experiment finishes, how many passes were made? Blue bibs go, it was about 70 passes. And then Richard Wiseman says, and did you see the gorilla? And they go, what gorilla? And he plays it back to them on the video, and there's a man in a gorilla suit running around. And because they'd asked their brains to pay attention to this particular task, they'd locked out other awareness, other potential in that situation. So the visionary leaders are very good at working with some of these principles. So in all honesty, I probably had a moment of being truly visionary only a couple of times in my working life. This is definitely what happened to me. I came up with this completely madcap idea in the late 1990s that schools needed a magazine. Completely bonkers, completely naive. I look back now and think, what was I thinking? There was like this sort of naive, I don't know if arrogance is the right word, but sort of this naive enthusiasm that schools really need this. Teachers need a bit of love. And if you can love the teachers, then they can love the kids. You know, what is it out there in the world of learning that I can get teachers to work with and understand even better? You know, things that I wish I'd known when I was a teacher that I can show them. You know, some really deep-seated values going on here. And this was the first magazine that I published 2 years later. Ta-da! And then 3 years later, that was the final issue. You can sort of see its growth, can't you? I was completely clueless. But I had a vision. I mocked it up in pieces of A3 paper and doing cut and stick as to what I wanted my magazine to look like. Hadn't a clue. But what I did have was the courage of my belief, my values, to say, who can help me? And people were amazing. If you ask the question, somebody will go, I'll help you. And sometimes they're quite influential and quite important in that process. And goodness me, if I hadn't asked, I wouldn't have got that. So that's where we ended up. And in terms of how the visionary system works, the V is the values. What's important to you? What's truly important to you about your work in the council? If you were to write that down now, those of you who've got a pen and paper, what would you put as the first thing that comes into mind? What's important to you? I'll come back to that in a second. What's important to you about your work at Wiltshire Council? What else is important about that? What else is on that list of words? What else is important to you about what you do here and why you do it? If you could only say 5 things, what would you say? The reason you get out of bed in the morning and come and do what you do. And those are your values. And the thing I discovered about the people that I interviewed before the book had even come into my mind as an idea was that you could tell what people's values were within 5 minutes of their time. Because they told you. Within 5 minutes of being with these people, you knew what was important and why. So if you don't know what's important and why, how can you possibly be expected to communicate that? This is time, I can't tell you how much this is time well spent. And how much it's time well spent in your one-to-ones before you get into any sort of conversations about objectives, performance, reviews, issues, problems, projects. How are you? What's important to you at the moment about your work? What's more important than that? And what's more important than that? And as a leader, do you say this stuff? Could your colleagues say of you, oh, I know what her answer would be. Oh, I know what so-and-so would say. It's the first 2 or 3 things. And what avenues have you got for having those conversations? Through your meetings, through your one-to-ones, through your presentations. If you were to put a picture on the screen at the start of every presentation that you did, that communicated what's important to you and your work and your team and your directorate, what would it be? If you get that bit wrong, you're going to find it really hard to be a visionary leader. Because this is the bit that other people will immediately connect with at that level of heart, or gut, or soul. Say, I want to spend time with this person. We all know that local authorities are facing difficult times. We all know that everything is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed within an inch of its life, and that you're unable to meet the needs of everyone in your communities that you really want to. But if you can hold on to those core values, what rules will you then set yourself about what you do every day at work? If you know what's genuinely important to you, there's a list of ready-made values. If you know what's genuinely important to you, what will you start saying no to? What will you say yes to more often? And what difficult decisions will you make better because they've come from here or here? As well as all the other demands that you're weighing up. Oh, didn't mean to do that. So for those of you that love your books, do you know Viktor Frankl? So this is Viktor Frankl's. It's a tiny little book, buy it and read it, let me take you a couple of bedtime reads. The first half of the book is all about his experiences in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. He was an Austrian Jew and a psychotherapist before the war, and obviously things didn't go too well for him during that particular time, and he ended up in both those camps and survived. The first part of the book is his story, and it's just mind-blowing, as you can imagine. The second part of his book is where it really gets interesting, because it's a psychological, psychotherapeutic analysis of what happened to the people around him in the camps. And he was particularly interested in Christmas 1944. And what was being said in the camps and in the bunk rooms in Christmas 1944 was very much around, the Russians, the Americans, were close to liberation. We're going to be out by Christmas. The rumours are starting to get in. We're going to be out by Christmas. Of course they weren't. And the death rate in Auschwitz from natural causes was the highest of the whole war in January 1945. And Victor talks in his book about how he puts that down to these sorts of words being lost for people, losing that sense of staying alive and purpose. And the famous quote from the book is, "The last of man's freedoms in any given set of circumstances is to choose his attitude." And John McCarthy, who was similarly in solitary confinement in Beirut back in the late 80s, says the same thing. When everything is taken from you, this is what you have left. And it's the words. What's really important to you more than anything else. So bringing that back into the workplace and the changes and the fast-paced nature of what's going on, Wally's saying today about having to work at home more than he sometimes like to because of the hot desking situation and allocations and things, trying to keep people away from this environment a little bit wherever possible with pressure on the desks, all that day-to-day sort of shenanigans. Put all of that to one side. As a leader, you've got to take people, despite what you may think and enjoy or not enjoy about this, and the politics with a big and a small p, your job is to motivate and inspire and bring people on a journey. So through all of this, what's the last freedom that you have? It's to live to purpose, to value. And real visionary leaders, it's just, you don't even have to ask them what's important. It just comes out of everything they do and say. A bit like Patrick. So here's some questions, thinking about your words. If you'd written down a list in a workshop, this is what I'd like you talking about next. So there's a bit of a test here. Twice in my professional career I've had epiphany moments and been reduced to a really pathetic weeping woman, basically. The first time in my career was in my third teaching job at Haysfield School in Bath, nothing to do with the school, but I had my back mountain biking and had to have 6 months off work, which was like my idea of hell, because I was really into my career and desperate to be a head teacher, and very much knocking off the promotions every 2 years and things like that. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to be at home with my little children for 6 months, this is going to drive me mad. They need me at work, I can't not be there. But what happened was, I actually, after a while, it took me a while, started to relax and enjoy being at the school gates at 3:30 and doing all of that sort of thing. And when I went back, thinking, yes, I can now start applying for deputy headships again, everything had changed. There'd been a real shift in this. That family word had gone right up in my heart and soul without me realising it. And I was crying at work all the time. I had no idea why. Suddenly dawned on me one day, my dad was the head, so I grew up with a career head teacher. He was never at home, lovely as he was, I hardly ever saw him. It just suddenly dawned on me one day, I don't want that for my kids. And we were out actually, if any of you know the Lavingtons, we were out on Pear Tree Hill at the back of Ilstoke, walking the dog, having this conversation with my husband. I said, you know what, I'm going to resign. I just went in the next morning and resigned. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew everything was wrong now. And the second time it happened was when I sold the magazine. So if you look at the list, what were my values about producing this magazine? I'm a teacher, that's still deep in my heart. I care about people, I care about young teenagers, kids. Some real core values here. I often say to people, I'm never going to be a millionaire because money's not on mine, it's on others, and that's fine, it's not on my list. But I sold the magazine and they said, come and work for us, Clare. Come and be the publishing editor, we still need you. So, I've arrived. I went out and bought a suit and high heels. I got on the train at Swindon twice a week and went into Paddington and across the tube to Farringdon, to sort of posh, swanky Google-type offices. But guess what? Within about 6 months, I was crying everywhere again. And it was because the magazine was now about selling advertising. Who can we get to write for the magazine on the back of which we can sell advertising? So it's like that part of it had been ripped out for me. And again, I just walked away. And at that point, fell into coaching by accident. So first and foremost, V is for values. So should we have a look at the rest of the vision system? So I is identity. What do you say to yourself about yourself? And the time when you most commonly see problems with this is when people get promoted into their first middle management or supervisory position. Because at that point you're still a member of the gang, the peer team, but actually you're now also their supervisor, manager, and that needs a shift in the hat that you wear, the messages that you deliver, the things that you can and can no longer say with those people in that set of circumstances. So that conversation around identity with them can be quite interesting. So do you say to yourself, I'm a leader? Do you say to yourself, or other people even better, this is what's really important to me and I have a vision and I am that person. It's okay to be that person. Quite often, you know, us Brits, we're not very good at it. It's not like, hey, look at me, I've got a vision. You're quite careful probably about who you talk to and when you have those conversations, because you don't want to look. I know I do. There's very few people in my life, personal or working life, where I am completely, utterly, totally myself and give of everything of myself. There's always that bit of sort of manoeuvring around groups and conversations and what it's okay to say and not say, because of being judged, of course. So do you actually look in the mirror in the morning and say, I am a manager, I am a leader at Wiltshire Council, I am this person, this is the hat I'm going to put on when I walk through those doors in the morning. I'm going to live that and breathe that and be that. Despite the imposter syndrome that we all suffer from, of course, very genuinely, in our own private moments and thoughts. You know, so do you act that? You know, you've got a very different version of me here today than my mates see out on a mountain bike. Because you step into that identity, don't you? With your physiology, with your breathing, with your tone of voice, with the way that you walk and move, and the words that you choose to use in your own head and out loud. So that's an interesting piece of work to do as an individual. You know, you've got this amazing coaching pool here in Wiltshire Council. Mandy, you're going to hate me for saying this because you're going to get a zillion and one requests now. You know, but us coaches have got tools and techniques for working with you on these things to help you uncover it and articulate it, and potentially even write it down as some sort of personal mission statement about who you are and what's important to you. So you can live it and breathe it even better than you do now. Maybe there's a touch of this to be had. I'm not quite sure on the definition, there's something slightly creepy about it, don't you think? I haven't found a better one yet. This is quite good though, Psychology Today. So you can all do this, can't you? You know, and you know as well as I do that you'll walk out there into the corridors and on the stairs, and certain people will come along and you'll duck your head because they're mood hoovers. You know, I'm not going to make eye contact because I'm going to get sucked into some miserable conversation here. But of course, you're all the people that walk around and smile and make eye contact and, you know, and live and breathe that person. Even in the face of adversity, even in the face maybe of delivering political messages that you don't sit comfortably with, but as a leader you're paid to do here. So there's a chapter about this in the book. I talk about in the book a couple of surgeons. I've had a lot of surgery on my knees, so I'm very familiar with a lot of knee surgeons. And the best knee surgeon on the planet is called Neil the Knee, and he works at Circle Bath, which is where I have my knee replacements. Anyone else met Neil the Knee? he's lovely, isn't he? There's just something about him, and he's very quietly spoken, and he's not at all arrogant, or you know, he doesn't think he's God's gift or anything. But there's something about him, he's like, I'm going to see Neil the Knee today, I'm so excited. He's so lovely. And yet there's another surgeon in the same hospital with sex on his shoes, who just clips his way up the corridors. Oh, look at me, I'm a surgeon. You know, and that's not charisma, is it? So, what you say about yourself, guess what? That's what's going to be projected to your colleagues, to the people that you work with. So, yes, how are we doing for time, Molly?
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes.
Okay, so we'll rattle through the rest, because these get less and less important as time goes on. V is definitely the most important. Then the identity, live it, walk it, breathe it. This is a guy called Matt Newbury, who was on Secret Millionaire in 2012, Channel 4, and S stands for stories. And Matt Newbury, who he's got an amazing bionic leg, he was a multi-millionaire at the age of 20-something and had fast sports cars and crashed them, and ended up having both his legs amputated after an accident. So he had two amazing bionic legs from America. But he went on Secret Millionaire because he wanted to write a cheque for a good cause. I expect you all know the format of the programme. And he decided to go to this indoor adventure centre in the centre of Salford, where some real rough and ready guy, the sort of guy that you sort of cross the street, if he was on the pavements in Trowbridge when you go down for lunch, you sort of find yourself crossing the street without realising it, because it looks a bit scary and a bit, I think I'll just go this way today. And he actually ran the centre as an amputee himself, and wasn't a natural, because of his demeanour, wasn't a natural at engaging with stakeholders for funding and things like that, bid writing, funding, schmoozing, networking. He was really struggling with his project to keep it going, let alone expand it. And he didn't know who Matt Newbury was, and Matt Newbury went and sat with him on the back step for a fag at the back of his place, and said to this bloke, what is it that you're doing here then? And this guy said, oh, do you know what? He said, I love this place. He said, but if I could do anything in the whole wide world, I'd buy a bus. He said, I'd buy a double-decker bus, and I'd take it out into the estates of Salford so the kids that can't get to me, I can get to them. He said, but that's just never going to happen, is it? He said, and it's just so important, he said, because, through all my life as a kid growing up on these types of estates myself, and went off to tell his story. And Matt Newbury went flipping heck. That's got me. Bought the bus, and the next thing we know, there's a police with buses. And it's all because of one story that engaged with hearts as well as minds, so having a fag at the back of an industrial unit one day. So what are your stories from your own experiences, from your own careers, maybe even from your childhoods, that inspire you to do what you do and may well inspire other people? If you've got a huge belief in a particular project or a particular engagement that you want to do with a stakeholder, or a particular way you want to run a meeting and present an idea, what's the story that you're going to tell that's going to bring that to life and engage hearts as well as minds? And this is what it needs. It needs to be definite. What was the date? What was the time and place where you experienced this? And some of you, I'm sure, can nail it. It's a Thursday afternoon in 1984. I'm sure you've all got experiences like that that you could bring into your leadership stories. You've got to take the journey, the listener, the reader through a journey of extremes. What was so awful, or so painful for you, or so amazing for you, that you learn from that you feel needs to be shared, that the strength of that will empower you and other people to do something about it going forward, to make the change that you want to make, to protect the people you want to protect. And what are the benefits for that, for your colleagues? Do this with me because this is what the team will achieve. This is how we sustain and build and feed the energy of our relationships. So this guy Chris, this is a Wiltshire company, Bath ASU and Farmaxo over in Caution. Does anyone know them? So Chris, the CEO, is actually a councillor in Baines. His background is Sandhurst. He was an officer in the army for a few years. And Bath ASU is a company that makes chemotherapy drugs, various other medicines for cancer patients. They started at the IUH in a porter cabin, and they've now got this wonderful new building in Caution Science Park. But Chris reduces his staff to tears for all the right reasons. I've seen him do it with a group of 6 people. He always comes in whenever I'm running a level 3 certificate course, and I've got 6 or 7 supervisors. He always comes in and delivers this sort of speechy type thing, and he reduces his staff to tears, and I've heard it several times. But he's also done it to the whole company. So when this building opened, he stood at the top of the winding stairs and delivered this speech, and it was like sort of DIY SOS big build. At the end of it, everybody was sort of weeping, blubbering wrecks, and it's all about. Life can be pretty boring working in this place. You're in a lockdown aseptic unit where you can't even go out for a wee for 6 hours at a stretch. You have to get permission if you need to be taken out to your saloon. You have to get all your stuff off, and you have to desanitize yourself. Anyway, it's a nightmare. And then you're just manufacturing all day in this lockdown unit. So it's not a bundle of laughs in this place to work. But Chris stands there and says there are people out there somewhere in the UK who are scared, who've just had the worst news of their life, who are frightened, who are worried for themselves as well as their families. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we stay here on overtime if a late order comes in, So that even though you're supposed to walk out this door at 4:30, somebody can get on that motorbike and take a saline mix with all the various bits and pieces it's needs in there, up to Newcastle in time for the district nurse to deliver that to that scared, vulnerable, frightened person at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Values. This is why we do it, this is who we are, and this is the story that supports that message. So the eye of vision is all about imagery. It's all about activating that reticular activating system. The vision boards, they work. There's neuroscience now to prove it. You know, ask your brain to pay attention to the images, the sounds, the feelings, the smells and the tastes of what it is that you want to have happen, and help the people that you work with to do the same. You know, how can you get your teams engaging at this level of embodiment? There's a little bit of the neuroscience to go with it. So oxytocin, to be creative, to see these things, to imagine these things, for something like this to have value, your brain needs to be in that creative state. It needs oxytocin to work at its best. Look after yourselves. This is about self-care. This is about that state of alpha waves in your brain, relaxed alertness, going for that walk at lunchtime, taking that break, having a meeting on the move around Trowbridge Park, doing whatever it is that you need to do to look after your physical as well as your mental body in the working capacity, so that your brain can do these things as brilliantly as it's designed to do. Seeing things through the occipital lobe, you know, images come in through your brain through the occipital lobe. 20% of your brain power works in pictures. That's amazing. So how can you harness that and help others to harness that? And how can you use this alpha wave state of relaxation, of mindfulness, of flow, of peripheral vision, of awareness, to capture and create these opportunities? And how can you support your colleagues to do the same? Because once you're in beta and gamma, which is the stuff of the working day, you go into focus, literally foveal vision. You stop seeing what's going on around you. You miss moments, you miss things that people say, feelings, energies that you could be picking up on. So you know, it's very productive for short-term success. In terms of leadership and visionary leadership, the more you can achieve that alpha state for yourself and others, the more visionary in real life, you know, in a practical sense, you can have that happen. And interestingly, your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between seeing it, imagining it, and actually doing it. So that mental rehearsal is vital. So when you go out today, the challenge is this really. The challenge is, you might think of it as the difference between transactional and command and control versus transformational leadership. So the visionary leaders are the Maasai. You know, the visionary leaders are the one who turn up in this state of alpha relaxedness. They sort of head out into the working environment. What's going on today? What is there to notice out there? Let's just lift my chin and my eyes and look around and feel what I'm feeling, hear what I'm hearing, see what I see, knowing that I can flex and react. Oh, there's this going on. There's berries growing in a tree about 1.5 miles away, and I can tell that because of the birds circling high in the sky. Let's go that way today and see what opportunities that affords for us. Whereas the command and the control, the agrarian, the John Deere tractor, you've got this barn of shiny tools and toys you can put on your tractor and go up and down, and you can produce vast amounts of very lovely crops and fill up your barns in the autumn, but at what cost? You know, if you've got your sat-nav on your tractor, if you watch Countryfile, you can probably be doing this within a centimetre of where you did it last year. At the same time as reading a magazine, because your cab is all sort of semi-automatic, you don't even have to drive it. But at what cost? You know, what's the energy depletion, the environmental depletion? What's the balance in order to be a visionary leader? You know, when is it right to immerse yourself in the day-to-day stuff and that sort of foveal, energised, fast-paced, move, do. to just be yourself and show up. But respond. Right, this is a quick bit because this is management. You can delegate all of this if you're a leader. That's the good news. So options. So, people start coming up with ideas. They get it. They get the vision. They get the reasons for it. Let's start generating the ideas. You've got tools and techniques coming out of your filing cabinets and things like this. Your computers are full of different ways of running meetings and having away days and getting people together and coming up with lots of different possibilities and starting to scope all of that out. And you've got a couple of coaching tools listed up there as well. What are you going to do with all of that? Make some decisions. Again, tools and techniques, there's plenty of them. As a visionary leader, you shouldn't be getting stuck into this stuff. Not much. You obviously need to know what's going on. You've got a bit of enthusiasm and interest. But if you're doing all of this stuff all the time, but your aim is to be more visionary and more of a leader, and maybe have a think about where that balance again needs shifting. So it's a bit of a challenge to you. I'm not going to say anything about that one. Just going to let that sit in your mind. So that's the classic, isn't it? So there we are. The final one is start. Do something with all of this. If you've got some notes, you're going to sit there in your notebook and develop your notebook, or you're going to take it away and use it to develop yourself. What's the first thing you're going to do, or say, or read, or think in relation to your learning today? So I brought the book with me, obviously. A couple of others that I've written over there. If you're interested, feel free to have a look. That's how to get hold of me, and I'm really happy to share these slides. So if you pop me an email, I'll very gladly send them out to you.